Well, thank you, Miss Toastmaster. Thank you for those kind words, and thank you all for allowing me to have the opportunity to do my first speech in evaluation and feedback. The title of my speech is, What's on Your Page 8? When I came to my first Toastmasters meeting here at the Peace Speakers Club back in January, I told you all a little bit about why I was here. And why I was here is because I had gotten a book from my daughter, and that book was How to Speak for Fun and Profit by Joe Saba. And that book has kind of been my roadmap, if you will. It's been a guideline to help me move into more public speaking in my career. And it's a great book, but one of the first things I did, I guess step number one, was to go out and find a great Toastmasters Club. And so that's what I did. So step one taken care of. Well, a few months later, I went to a meeting of the National Speakers Association in Denver, Colorado. And in the book, that's pretty much step number two. So I get out there, there are about 70 members, and who wheels up next to me in his wheelchair but the venerable Joe Saba, the author of the book. So Joe wheels up, Joe's 90, he wheels up, and we just hit it off. And it was one of the best 3 hours I've spent in a long, long time. Joe and I spoke about his book. We spoke about his career in speaking. We spoke about what my career goals are with speaking. When we had a speaker, he would sit there and he'd tap on my notebook and he'd tell me the important things that I needed to listen to. And it was just fantastic, and I just loved it. But about 2/3 of the way through that, Joe looked at me and he said, everything you need to know is on page 8. And I got to tell you, I've read this book. It's back there. It's dog-eared. It's 83 pages. I've read it forward, backward, sideways. But sitting there, I couldn't remember what was on page 8. I couldn't remember exactly what was there. So I have this great day. I end up getting back to my hotel room that night, and I carry it with me all the time. And I pull it out of my satchel, and I turn to page 8. And as I'm reading it, I was floored. You see, Joe's dad died when he was 9 years old, and he never had the opportunity to learn valuable life lessons from a father figure, much less how to take advantage of his different talents. Well, page 8 is his list of 5 role models that he adopted, guys that he likes to call dad, that helped to mold him into the man he is. Joe's page 8, the 5 men, their lessons that make Joe Saba who he is, what he speaks about, and helps to form his passion. Those 5, he speaks of Dale Carnegie, who taught him to never criticize or complain. Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, who taught him to believe in himself. Zig Ziglar, who taught him that he can have anything you want in life if you help other people get what they want. And Cavett Robert, who taught him to find the one thing you enjoy doing in life so much that you do it for free, and then when you get good enough at it, you can actually get paid to do it. Now, I've just named 4 people. There's a 5th person, a 5th dad on that list, and not least is Jesus Christ. Joe says that Jesus had the first Toastmasters Club. He said, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. He goes on to say that Jesus taught him and us to go out into the world and spread the word. So that's his page 8, his core values, what he's about. He goes on to say in the book that if you stick to your values, you have passion, and you find your audience, you will be successful as a speaker. Y'all can tell why I love this so much. He made it sound so simple, but I'm sitting there in my Denver hotel room all by myself, and I was just thinking, boy, I just don't know if I can condense all about myself into a page 8. I just don't think I can do it. But over the next 48 hours, I'd realized that I already did have a little bit of an idea of what my page 8 is. So only 10 days before I'd given my eulogy, an icebreaker speech, and the things that made up my page 8, I go back to talking about my eulogy, which was talking about hard work, family, friends, my goal of making life better for the people that I manage, and lecturing at my church. So maybe I did have a good idea of what was on my page 8. What's on your page 8? Does it summarize what you are all about, the essence of you? Do you know what those things are? Can you sum it up like Joe did and give people kind of a Cliff Notes version? What makes you who you are, what you speak about, and what makes you passionate? So I was excited about my trip and my time spent with Joe in the NSA meeting, but I need to tell you one more thing about page 8. The last line of the last paragraph on Joe's page 8 doesn't talk about himself or what he's about, but it talks about his audience. And here I quote, "In other words, go from village to village, and if they aren't ready to listen to your message, shake the dust off your feet and go to the next Rotary Club." Now, that is a tongue-in-cheek reference to Acts 13:14, and many of you all may be aware of it. And it talks about when Barnabas and Paul go to Antioch and ultimately leave Antioch and they go to Iconium. They're not welcomed by the Jews and are hastily pushed out of the city. And some scholars say they were even beaten for their teachings. But what did they do? They didn't water down their speech. They didn't change what they were speaking about. They changed none of that. They actually changed their audience. And it all began to come together because earlier in the day I talked to Joe and I said, "Joe, over your entire career, what did you do with people that were uninterested or didn't want to hear you?" And he looked at me and he took that finger and he tapped out NEXT. And what that told me is that Joe wasn't going to change his message, and he never has. And that's what page 8 is about also. He was confident in what he believed in, and I think that's the lesson to me and possibly the lesson to you. You don't change your message when things aren't going right. You change your audience. So less than 48 hours later, after I read those words on Joe's page 8, I was back in Louisville stepping up to the lectern at my church. I had been spreading the word or helping to spread the word at that very spot since I was 11 years old. So as I'm reading the first reading, I had a calm come over me. And I realized that this too was part of my page 8. And as I finished reading from that Bible, looking out on the congregation, I even had a better understanding because as I finished reading, of all things, Acts 13 and 14, I finished with these words. "So they shook the dust from their feet in protest against them and went to Iconium." So at that moment, I knew I was well on my way to figuring out my page 8. What's on your page 8? All right.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.